The debate on whether carry optics technology is ready to be relied on for use on handguns has been raging since the rise of experimenting with them started as far back as the 80s and has grown in prevalence ever since. Some of the very early adopters and advocates for the real-world use and advantages of the red dot have also brought to light some of the overlooked shortcomings that they may bring to shooters. This is a highly polarizing topic, and I want to take a stab at it today. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Ammo Man channel. My name is Kenneth Miller, and today we're going to talk a little bit about red dots versus iron sights and a couple of little extra theories that I have personally. Now wait, you right now watching this video, you probably fall in one of two camps. If you're in camp one, you may have already decided that the dot has caught your eye and that there's no changing that. You will probably dismiss anyone saying there are distinct advantages of irons over carry optics, and anyone who does is probably old, irrelevant, or some horrible mixture of both. In Camp 2, you will have the preconceived notion that iron sights are indestructible, red dots will fail when you need them most, and cannot be counted on for serious defensive shooting now or anytime in the near future. All I ask is that you would just hear me out. What I can assume you are thinking is that I'm going to try to convince you one way or another on either removing your red dot from your pistol or not even getting one in the first place. That isn't my intention at all. My goals for today are as follows. I want to showcase some of the pros and cons of both sighting systems, present a mix of statistical and practical evidence of carry optics in use today, and then I want to contextualize both of those for the average person who carries a gun on them every day, and then lastly I'd like to showcase an idea that we may not even be using either sighting system correctly, and I want to talk a little bit about that. First, let me make a few statements and disclaimers. If you're going to take a soundbite from me, I would prefer that you take these ones. First, there are a few good people out there teaching the best ways to shoot firearms, and more specifically, the use of carry optics. I ain't one of them. And in case it isn't clear, I am getting paid by Ammo Man to make these videos for you. So a grain of salt over everything I say is probably best. I do shoot and enjoy both sighting systems very much. I think that they both have some distinct advantages and disadvantages, and I think that all of us should be very careful how the marketing we consume dictates the decisions we make for our carry guns and carry gear. All right, so let's get into it. I think that on average, most people would perform better with a carry optic given that they have no substantial issues with their vision and they can not only consistently find the dot on presentation, but can consistently track it during shooting as well. I know these are some pretty tough qualifiers, but let's just pause there for now. If you're watching this video, it's probably because you've watched 5 others on the exact same topic. I know it doesn't take long to sift through YouTube and find videos asking the same question: which is better? For the most part, you're just going to find an overwhelming support for the carry optics, but there are a memorable few that have gotten some attention over the last few years that mention some of the downsides of optics on handguns and affirm what, in my opinion, some of the still present advantages are of iron sights for the everyday carry individual. Now, as I'm sure you can guess, these claims were not received with much enthusiasm by the younger internet crowd, but unfortunately I think that was in large part due to confirmation bias coupled with a healthy dose of out of context bandwagoning. So what are these people saying? Performance gains are usually the first thing brought up in the discussion, and I think that's a pretty decent place to start. Currently, our best data tracking comparing these two sighting systems are primarily law enforcement officials, our military, or highly competitive shooters. Now, of course, there are other studies that have been done, and I'm positive more will be conducted in the future, but there still is a lot left to be desired when searching for hard data comparing the two. Over the last 10 years, there has been such a significant technology increase due to the exploration that the military and competitive shooters were doing over the last couple of decades, and now with law enforcement use being far more prevalent, we are seeing more and more people who are adopting carry optics as commonplace. I definitely think that we are well past the infancy of optic adoption on pistols, farther than its adolescence even, but there are still issues with carry optics that are pretty much resolved for rifles that we still haven't figured out 100% for pistols. And I do see a lot of merit in analyzing the military side of the discussion, and I do have a personal vested interest in that. However, the context is unrelated enough to the everyday carry discussion that I'm just going to omit that for another time. If we are honest, most of our everyday lives do not require full battle dress and equipment, at least not at the moment. If we take a look into the law enforcement side of things, I think it's no secret that the vast majority of agencies today are lacking in their firearms training programs. And even in the ones that aren't, you have a whole other slew of issues. A historic rise in officers leaving their departments due to societal pressures, financial burden, or other, means that we are also having a rapid rise in the recruitment of untrained and underprepared graduates. Regardless of how you feel your tax dollars should be allocated to those agencies, the fact of the matter is that improving your skills with a handgun, as well as decision making during stressful life or death situations, does require a significant amount of time and training if positive results are to be expected. Now, I know this may seem obvious to some, but this significant amount of training isn't something that the average officer in 2024 is getting before strapping on her or his duty rig before their shift. Based on this reason alone, the average officers having to qualify with irons or carry optics are going to be relatively new into their shooting careers. These officers will likely have only received extensive or formal education on either iron sights or only carry optics. Why does this matter? Let's say we give a brand new officer a red dot. Because they haven't received extensive training with a pistol yet, they won't have formed the habit of focusing on their front sight, which is taught traditionally. If coached correctly, this student will be instructed to fixate on their target instead, the end result being that the red dot will superimpose on their target, allowing for more visual processing to be spent on the potential threat, in addition to remaining aware as the situation develops further. I'm sure you can see why this is a huge benefit and could be the difference in making critical decisions. This is easier said than done, but it does seem like it's fair to say that learning to target focus comes more naturally with a carry optic compared to iron sights. Here lies in the first problem with people wanting to transition from iron sights to a red dot. Most of you are probably too young to know who Mas Ayub is, but he put it best in a video published about 2 years ago. The longer you have been habituated to System A, the longer it's going to take you to transition to System B. For me, this is completely true even at a young age. I still struggle from time to time target focusing because of the habits I've formed by focusing on my front iron sight. During extended strings of fire or at further distances, I tend to pull my focus back onto my front sight, or when I'm shooting a red dot, I'll fixate on the actual dot to confirm its alignment on target. It is often brought up that only red dots are capable of being used in this target focused manner, but that's simply not true. Just like you can choose to fixate on either the dot or the target, you can conversely choose to fixate on the front sight post or the target as well. For decades and still today, you would most likely be taught to focus on the front sight of your irons, and while this is highly effective, it is well within reason to shoot accurately while focusing on your target instead and continuing to align and monitor your sights in a blurred fashion. What I'm describing may sound like point shooting, but it isn't what I'm talking about. That is a completely separate technique for another day. But let's go back to the law enforcement plight for a moment. Consider you have a few hundred officers who are brand new to pistols, and you are responsible for getting them from green to mean with as little time and ammunition as possible. Which sounds like the easier task? Explaining how to correctly align iron sights and then pull focus to the front sight while shooting, or just teach them how to find their dot and tell them to put it on whatever they want to put a hole in. Yeah, I would tend to agree that I think number 2 sounds easier as well. On the flip side to all of this, you have a highly competitive shooter who on average is shooting tens of thousands of rounds each year in pursuit of accolades, personal achievement, or just more followers on Instagram. These competitors will be shooting more than enough to create habits. These habits will eventually elevate into a mental program that they can deliver subconsciously. This theory of subconscious competence or automaticity is just something that I'm taking from a few scholars, John Holshan and John Hearn. I respect both Johns quite highly in the shooting and training world, and you would definitely be well served to hear what they have to say about the realities of the everyday individual's threat profile and how to train to combat it. I have trained multiple times with John Hearn in person, and I would highly recommend getting yourself a ticket to his Crimes and Criminals Risks and Mitigations lecture happening online live this December. I will put a course link in the description below. Alright, so competitive shooters are shooting a lot and creating all of these great habits. What are these habits? Well, if they are any good, they are most likely chasing efficiency at every level possible. Things like economy of motion, consistent fundamentals, visual processing, strategy, accuracy, speed, etc., etc. The list goes on. A significant portion of this is built upon the principle of target focus, regardless of the sighting system that they're using. Having the ability to focus on your target instead of your sights without sacrificing accuracy is visually freeing and saves a lot of time and mental energy. This ultimately is going to increase your overall performance. I'll say it again in case you missed it. This is regardless of the sighting system. It's more about how we are using our sights. Okay, so we've discussed a little bit about the cops and a little bit about the competitive shooter. But since we aren't cops, we automatically aren't doing any life or death customer service every day. And unless we are engaged with a highly stressful and fast-paced job, competing against our coworkers for more than just ego, we probably aren't relating much to the pro shooters either. Neither of the professions we've talked about so far really look like our daily lives, but there are some things about them that we can look at for why we might or might not want a red dot. Cops want a solution to increase their hit rate for their officers, both when they need to qualify and even more so in the field under stress. Competitors are looking for anything to give them an edge, and they do need their equipment to function every time when their winnings, ego, and sponsorships are on the line. And optics are great when it comes to rapidly engaging targets at vastly different distances and sizes. So let's take all that information and bring it back to you and me, the average individual who wants to carry a gun on them confidently with really good performance daily if possible. What really falls within the average American individual's threat profile? Obviously, the city and the culture you are in is going to play a significant role in this, but the majority of defensive handgun uses that have been documented are reported to be at much closer distances. People wobble back and forth on whether it's 7 yards or 7 feet, but basically what I'm saying is it won't be at a great distance. Instances like that are the outliers. And I get it, we all play what-if games, and these can be very helpful when determining what tools or methods you will elect to employ in your own personal life, but like all things, they can be taken too far outside the scope of reality if not checked. Marketing, new technology, and convincing influencers who are using carry optics can very easily sway the average gun owner who is getting into pistol shooting that getting a red dot is the solution to their problems, or just the right way to go. You'll hear about their superior accuracy, improved performance, or about how you can't target focus without one. And yes, there are legitimate cases to be made about the ease of shooting at distances greater than 20 yards with red dots, as well as the speed of learning to target focus. But there are also some arguments that are made for each system, both pros and cons, that I think are pretty silly. Starting with distance shooting and accuracy, we've already addressed this in part. Purely looking at the odds, we are not going to need to shoot at some great distance, so the inarguable advantages of a red dot in that regard are pretty slim that we're going to really get the juice there. And as far as accuracy goes, I'll just say that I don't really think that the optics themselves are any more accurate than irons, but depending on each individual and different eyesights, someone may or may not have an easier time using a dot when shooting groups. This is especially true of aging eyes. So in order to prove this theory to myself, I took my carry gun, which is an iron-sighted Gen 3 Glock 17, and this Gen 5 Glock 17 with an optic, and I shot a couple of groups with each of them at 20 yards just to compare the two. I also had my buddy Zach do this as well to see what we were both capable of.
My name is Zach Gibson. You guys have seen me, or seen my father on Ammo Man before. I also work for Ballisticraft.
I think you're gonna do a little fake name.
Oh, should I? Yeah, I'll do a fake name.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is Archibald LaFliz Witwicky. And dude, hold on, I gotta do that without smiling.
Okay.
Yeah, my name's Archibald LaFliz Witwicky. I work for a familiar company that have been on Ammo Man before.
I myself shoot irons a fair bit more often than pistol optics, but Zach is pretty much completely shooting pistol optics. My Glock 17 is all stock except for my blacked out Ameriglow sights with my front sight, which I did paint a bright neon orange, and then the Gen 5 Glock 17 is all stock except for a striker control device from Langdon Tactical and a custom slide from Zafiri Precision with a optic cut, which I put the Holosun 407C X2 on. So let's take a look at the groups. With my Carry 17, I had a consistent grouping of about 2.5 inches on average. I feel pretty good about this for my level of ability, though I do think I could squeak out slightly tighter groups if I was picky about the lighting conditions and obviously the ammo we shot. we were just shooting some of my current favorite training ammo, which is this Magtech steel case 115 grain 9mm. Feel free to check out our site if you're looking for a cheap round to get some training in. And remember, we are getting ready to close out the year, so for all of you that shop with us, those points you've built up could make a pretty significant savings off of your next order. Okay, so how about the dot? The carry optic was getting me around 2 inches other than this one flyer, leaving me to believe that I had kind of successfully dispelled any accuracy disputes that would come up. But as you can see right here, Zach shot a little tighter of a group with his dot over the irons. I think this is a pretty clear indicator and a case to be made for demonstrating that it isn't about what sighting system you have, but more about your understanding and practical application of them. If we move on to target focus and positive identification, I'm kind of just lumping these two into one because they are often brought up together. Something to think about is that if you aren't training regularly, you are most likely going to be target fixated anyway due to the inherent stress of the entire situation, instead of focusing on your front sight. This isn't to say that it cannot be done. On the contrary, there are multiple accounts of real-world defensive shootings or officer-involved shootings where the victim or officer claimed that they had a clear sight picture. Either way, I think it's a pretty good idea to have habits in place that will help you during the most difficult shooting problem you're likely to encounter in your own life. My overall argument is not really this versus this, but just to consider if we are using our sighting systems properly in the first place. If not, will getting a red dot be the best thing that teaches us how to fix that? It might be. As I've already discussed at length, target focus can be achieved regardless of if you're using irons or optics. It really just comes down to your personal eyesight and dedication to train and shoot that way. I think there's merit to experimenting with this more in the future and ultimately working towards transitioning as much of our shooting as possible to this technique. Whether you can get there by continuing to shoot with irons or possibly needing to switch to a red dot will depend on you. Using multiple focal points for different distances is not optimal for performance shooting, and that can do some pretty funny things to your brain unless you practice it often. And there's a lot of data in the sports science realm to support this claim, so if you're interested in that, be sure to go and check out my article on our blog. I will have some additional information there. Talking about positive identification though, we are definitely getting farther and farther into the weeds. Though I would love to give this topic a follow-up video, but you'll just have to let me know if that's something you all want to see as well. Okay, so my take on positive ID is being able to identify your target is incredibly important, and if you can't confirm what and where you are putting holes, then you probably aren't in the right. That's just basically my full stop. But if you keep in mind our statistical threat risk and what that looks like, I really just got to admit that I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around an encounter at 7 yards or closer where I'm a little fuzzy on if the individual that's attacking me or threatening to attack me is the person that needs a bullet to the face or not. Optics are cool, but I'd say having some sort of significant light source will offer you more than an optic in practical reality, with the most practical and statistical benefit probably being a handheld light. But hey, I mean, we all get to make choices. These are just some of my initial thoughts. Arguments on durability and price are definitely valid as well, but what is available on the market today spans the spectrum of quality to just utter garbage. Unfortunately, I feel like the reality is that these factors are so subjective, so I will just submit to you this instead. Durability is something to take into account for either system. Red dots seem to be more reliable than they were unreliable historically. The manufacturers who have been in the game since the beginning are getting better, and there are also new players creating offerings each year. This is both good and cause for careful consideration. Now, before I go into the failure points of red dots, let me touch real quick on the durability of iron sights. Iron sights, contrary to what some may say, can most definitely fail. I have seen and experienced it myself on a multitude of occasions. From shearing off completely to just walking or falling out of dovetails, they are not immune to breaking. Talk to any reputable instructor and they will tell you the same thing. Iron sights are very dependable though, and these occasions of failure are probably still less than red dots. In my opinion, that's probably more to do with the fact that they have less failure points to begin with. But regardless of the sighting system, it's still a necessity to mount your iron sights correctly, as well as maintain and check on them periodically to ensure they're in good working condition. For carry optics, I see a lot of people making bigger stinks out of battery life, options of dot size, or whether it's an open or closed emitter. Now, there are plenty of carry optics with acceptable battery life or models that don't require the user to unmount their dot from the gun in order to exchange it. There are also a plethora of options that have proven to be sufficiently reliable, though not 100%, and continue to take beatings from more and more people year over year. The biggest downside of carry optics, in my opinion, is that they still have mounting systems that are not optimized for the 99% of people who are carrying handguns. In order to get the best reliability available today, there is specific hardware as well as mounting procedures that can drastically improve or degrade the reliability of your carry optic. Another issue is that we still have horribly weak mounting screws. This just needs to be fixed in order for an inexperienced person to reasonably expect to mount and rely upon a red dot for defensive use. What's worse is that depending on which optic you choose, you may or may not have any other option but to spend a large sum of money to cut your slides specifically for that optic, or just accept that you need to buy an adapter plate for the slide first, increasing the amount of failure points to this system as a whole. This might not be much of a consideration for everyone, but for someone who is carefully considering these costs against what they feel they might be being told is necessary, these are still significant barriers, though it's the best it's ever been. Now, I know that we didn't touch on all of the pros or cons of shooting with a red dot today, but just know that there is a significant learning curve when adapting it for your primary sighting system. I do think that as a brand new shooter that the learning curve can be fairly quick, but if you are already an experienced iron-sighted shooter, it's possible that you will encounter difficulties when transitioning to a red dot. So give yourself time and don't give up. There are a multitude of other considerations like concealability, low light use, and the 1% likelihoods for those who care about that. And though we can't get into all of that today, I hope that what I have presented can spark some thoughtful discussions nonetheless. In my opinion, at the end of the day, I think that you should just work on learning to target focus on both and try both sighting systems if you have the money and time to put into that. If you liked anything that you've heard today, please consider subscribing, and I will look forward to exploring more on this topic and others in the future. I hope you have a good one, and thanks for watching.